Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Andrew Bullitt, and I'm going to be talking about instructional design practices for individuals with autism spectrum disorders. And really this can be used for any learner, but we're going to be using a lot of examples for learners with autism spectrum disorders. So let's jump in and talk about what instructional design is as a whole, and then we'll jump into a series of components of instructional design that you can take and apply to your practice currently. So instructional design really is the process of analyzing instructional content that you want to teach. So what are the figures or the features of instructional content that are important, and how do we analyze to ensure that we have the appropriate stimulus control for the types of learning we want to have? We then want to design a scope and sequence of materials. So this is going to be sequencing and ordering our instructional content. We can specify then the instructional format, so how exactly are these skills going to be taught, what are the teaching techniques and technologies, and then we have to evaluate and revise the program, because good instructional design is never over once you go through it one time. A lot of times we do field testing, in which we pilot our instructional design and we see where the errors are and we continue to revise. So it's a very recursive process. So although you may think of this as a sequence, we're oftentimes moving up and down throughout this process as the learner's performance dictates. So as a general framework, I use the system of instruction adapted from Sue Markle and Phil Tiemann. And what we're really going to be looking at is this series of first three steps. So we specify our goals, right? And then we get standards and objectives from those goals. So what is the goal of the instructional program? What we'll be talking about today is content analysis. So based on the goals that we have, how do we analyze the instructional material to see exactly what we need to teach and the features of everything that we need to teach? From there, we create our criterion test. So what is the performance that we want the learners to engage in? What is a good assessment of that? If we said that the learner has accurately learned the skill, what are we asking them to do here? From there, we assess to see what the learner's entering behavior repertoire is. And then after we do all of that, then that is when we get into teaching and learning. So the three phases of teaching and learning, which is instruction, practice, and application, which is not going to be covered in this talk, but is a talk for another time. And throughout this, we're taking performance data and probing for generative responding. So this entire system of instruction is followed when designing an instructional system or an instructional unit. However, we're going to be focusing on content analysis through the remainder of this talk. So there are four procedures for content analysis of objectives. And we're going to be going through each of these throughout this presentation. So we're going to do a component composite analysis of each objective. We're going to identify the kinds of learning inherent in each component. We then analyze that kind of learning with either a task analysis or a features analysis, and we prescribe learning channels for each component. Again, these procedures generally can be sequential, but this is going to be a recursive process. So we may be moving up and down these specific steps. So let's jump into component composite analysis. So when we have our goal of what we want to teach, we then can break that down into specific component repertoires that we need to establish. So we think of those terminal goals or our composite skills, and we can break them down into those subcomponents. So for example, if we want to teach reading comprehension skills, that might be our composite, right? To teach reading comprehension skills or a reading comprehension repertoire. However, we're not going to start with comprehension. We need to look at the component skills that are required to produce reading comprehension. Now, in order to identify what skills to pinpoint, we need to analyze these composites into the relevant components. So we can look at three different types of skills within a hierarchy. So I'm going to start from the bottom up. So we talked about the composite skill as those authentic, higher level performances that socially validate a learner's mastery of content area. So those are the real world application skills that we want to see, authentic, high level performance. So for example, let's use the soccer example. So for example, the composite skill may be juggling, right? So kicking the ball between your feet. I can break that down into component skills. And the component skills are those skills that depend on one or more tool skills and that comprise or ingredients for the composite skill. So for example, a component skill may be kicking the ball on one foot, on your right foot, and kicking the ball on your left foot and popping up the ball from the ground. Those are 3 component skills that are required to see growth on a composite level skill. Tool skills are those minimal responses that are at the core of many, if not all, the skills and concepts inherent in the concept areas. So if my component skill was kicking the ball between, tool skills would be those fine motor skills of my foot. So being able to move my foot, being able to lift my leg, those sorts of behaviors are going to be required to see growth on the components of kicking the ball on each foot. And those components are required to see growth on the composite of juggling. So let's take a look at some additional examples in content areas. So if we had math, a composite skill may be single-digit math facts. So we want the learner to answer accurately math facts. So 2 + 2 is 4, 2 + 3 is 5, 3 - 2 is 1. We want to have the learner be able to engage in these sorts of math facts. So if that's my composite, what are some components that are necessary to see growth in there? Well, a component skill, they have to be able to write numbers. They have to be able to read numbers. They have to discriminate between the addition and subtraction signs. All those skills need to be built before I would expect growth on my composite of single-digit math facts. Now, I'm not going to grow in my component skills unless those tool skills are firm. So tool skills of the component skills are holding a pencil correctly, writing marks, attending to stimuli, so visually attending to stimuli. I need all of those tool skills to be firm to have growth on my component, and growth on my component is going to predict growth on my composite. We might look at some higher order skills like writing a research report. With writing a research report as our composite, the component skills might be writing complete sentences, finding relevant articles, writing a thesis statement, etc. Our tool skills may be typing words and reading words. So I need to be able to type words quickly to be able to write a complete sentence, and all of those goes into the composite of writing a research report. Now, these types of skills, this type of analysis of a hierarchy of skills within a domain are all relative to 2 things, right? It's relevant to the learner's current behavioral repertoire. So where the learner's at is going to determine what skill functions as a composite or a component or a tool. Or if we're writing a blanket program, what we might see is that the component and composite analysis is relevant to the specific goal or objective of that program. So what this means is that a composite skill for one learner may be a component for another learner, or maybe a tool skill for another learner. So let's see what this looks like. Let's say that we're working with a young student with autism, and we're teaching the skill of writing numbers. It could be writing letters too. So if we have the composite skill of writing numbers, we want to see growth there. Component skills for that are holding a pencil and making marks. So I'm going to target those component skills because if I do that, I'm going to get growth on writing numbers. And then for them to be able to hold a pencil correctly and to make marks correctly, they're going to have to be able to pinch, to squeeze, and attend to stimuli. So I want you all to recognize that these skills aren't linear. It's not like you first teach pinching and then you teach holding a pencil and then you teach writing numbers. What we're doing is we're working on these skills because they're predicting growth on higher level skills. So if I work on pinching, squeezing, and attending to stimuli to fluency, I'm going to get growth on my component without a whole lot of practice, such as holding a pencil and making marks. And if I'm getting growth on my component skill, I'm going to get or predict growth on my composite without having to do a lot of instruction at that level. Now remember that these are all relative to the learners. So let's say for this learner's composite skill is single-digit math facts and setting up math problems. So component skills for that is writing numbers, discriminating between numerical signs. So notice that writing numbers now is functioning as a component skill for this learner. and holding a pencil and writing marks is the tool skill that we're working on for this learner. But we may have a learner that's a little bit higher in their academic repertoires. So for them, the composite skill is basic computational algorithms. We're building the component skill of single-digit math facts and setting up math problems. And a tool skill that for them is writing numbers and discriminating between numerical signs. So notice how, depending on the learner and their repertoire, these skills can function as either components, tools, or composites. So what I want you to do is pause the video here, and I want you to look at and tell me whether or not these skills are in the correct order. And if they're not, I want you to resequence them for what is the appropriate tool, component, composite. So go ahead and pause the video. Awesome, so let's look at the first one. Tool skill, sing an opera. Component skill, sing a scale. Composite skill, sing a note. These are not in the correct order. The tool skill is singing a note. The component skill is singing a scale. And the composite skill is singing an opera. Let's look at set 2. Tool skill, connect bat with baseball in a swing. Component, hit the baseball out of the park. Composite, grip a baseball bat. The tool skill here is gripping a baseball bat. The component skill is connecting the bat with a baseball in a swing. And the composite skill is hitting the baseball out of the park. Let's look at set 3. Read numbers is the tool skill. See and write answers to math facts is the component skill. And the composite is add columns of 3-digit numbers. That is in the correct order. So those is an appropriate hierarchy for that skill set. Let's look at set 4. Write a complete sentence. See and copy at a rate of 120 letters per minute. Discriminate between complete sentences and segment fragments. That is not in the correct order. The tool skill is see and copy at a rate of 120. The component is to discriminate between complete sentences and sentence fragments. So as a general rule, you always want to discriminate before you operate. So discriminate between examples and non-examples before they generate their own. And then the composite skill is write a complete sentence. Let's look at set 5, tool skill. Sound out CVC and CVCE words. Component, read a sentence with expression. Composite, say the sounds of the letter. That is not in the correct order. The tool skill is say the sounds for the letters. The component skill is sound out CVC and CVCE words. And the composite skill is read a sentence with expression. Now, when we do this kind of analysis, we want to see growth on that composite level repertoire. However, that's not where we're going to target our instruction. We're going to focus on building frequencies of the component and tool skills because there's a functional relationship between fluency and component and tool skills and growth on that composite level. So for example, building frequencies on writing the numerals 0 through 9 directly affects math performance or performance on math facts. So if I can't write 0 through 9, 60 digits of numbers 0 through 9, I'm not going to hit my goal of math facts of 60 math facts per minute. So just by building my frequencies of writing numerals 0 through 9, I'm going to increase my frequencies of those higher skills without targeting my instruction there. Another example, building frequencies on pinching directly affects performance on other fine motor skills. So for example, if I work on pinching to frequency, that's going to affect the composite repertoire of putting and zipping up my jacket. I'm not going to be able to put on my coat and zip up my jacket if I don't have a firm pinching repertoire. So we're going to talk about this in a little bit more. So let's look at some empirical demonstrations of this. So this is from Shihon and colleagues with the title of it is The Effects of Fluent Skills of Big 6+6 Skills Elements on Functional Motor Skills with Children with Autism. So in this study, the authors targeted a variety of tool skills from the Big 6+6. And the Big 6+6 is comes from the precision teaching world and looks at what are those basic fine motor and gross motor responses that are needed for almost all motoric behavior. So in the study, they targeted reach, grasp, pull, and place. And they built those component skills to high frequencies. What they did then was measure the composite level skill without any intervention. And the composite level skills were things like putting on socks and pulling up underwear. So you see in baseline for all learners, the percentage of steps completed was low. When they built the big 6+6, those fine motor skills to higher frequencies, we saw growth on the composite level performance without targeting that at all. So they did not target the composite skill, but they got growth in it from building the frequencies on the component skills. This is a project that we did at the Matthew Reardon Center here in Savannah, Georgia. So we worked on math skills for learners with autism. So it was we used the pull-out room in a school specific to children with autism. And we had 6 children in our control group, and we had 3 children in the intervention group. The control group received instruction as normal. So they got their regular math instruction, and we just measured their performance on math facts. The intervention group received instruction on math tool skills. So they received instruction on C-Say numerals 0 through 20 and C-Write numerals 0 through 9. So those are the only skills we worked on, and we measured the frequency of math facts completed correctly. So in our control group, what we saw was the number of corrects remained stable. So what I want you to think of the term acceleration is just growth across time. So what is the frequency of behavior? How much is it growing across time? So a times 1.07 means from the Monday of one week to the following Monday, the behavior multiplied by times 0.07, times 1.07, meaning it's basically staying the same, tiny, tiny, tiny growth. We also see that the errors are dividing by 1.57, so they're getting less errors, but their corrects are not increasing. In the intervention group, again, without any intervention on math facts, we saw that the number of corrects were accelerating at a times 1.79, so very close to a times 2, means that the learners were almost doubling their frequencies of correct responding across weeks. And this is correct responding on that composite level skill, which we didn't target. So we were getting growth on these math facts without having to address math facts, because there's a functional relationship between growth on tool and component skills and performance at that composite level. So we do a component composite analysis. Then, with each of those components that we've identified, we have to identify the kinds of learning that are inherent in each component. So we take our component skill and we try to see what are the kinds of learning that are inherent. So what do I mean by that? Well, Tiemann and Markle, so the same individuals that I showed you the system of instruction for, offered an analysis of different kinds of learning. So there's a couple of different taxonomies of learning out there. Tiemann and Markle offers a behavioral account of different types of learning in their book. So this is the kind of learning matrix that they wrote about in their book, Analyzing Instructional Content, and that's available through Morningside Press. There are 3 columns here, so you'll hear me refer to them as columns. So you have the psychomotor column as column 1, simple cognitive as column 2, and then the complex cognitive domain in column 3. And notice underneath of all of these is this emotional box. So let's talk about the emotional level of learning before we get into specific other types of learning. So emotions underlie all learning. And I know some of you may be behavior analysts and know that I'm a behavior analyst and be like, emotions, that's mentalistic. But I think we all know that emotions are real. Right? And when I'm talking about emotions, I'm talking about the physiological responding to instructional content and material. And not only physiological, but some of those psychological responding as well. So what are your thoughts towards the instruction? What are your feelings towards the instruction? And then physiological, what's your body doing and telling you in the presence of instructional content and material? And you can think of this as responding condition and relations between the instructional material and events. So, is the learner experiencing anxiety-related behaviors? Fear? Are their face turning red? Is there increase in heart rate? Is there sweating? Their palms are sweaty? Are they smiling when they're in their instructional learning episodes? So these are things that we want to account for, because we need to design our instruction to produce and prevent negative emotional responding towards instructional material. We want our learners to be happy. We want them smiling. We want them to experience joy and a sincere love and appreciation of what we're doing and what we're teaching. I want you to think about this. How would you feel currently if you were asked to stand in front of 100 people and solve a very complex math problem? Some of us say like, oh no, I'm math illiterate, or I'm a math challenged, right? And for some reason we think that's okay, that our educational systems failed us when it came to math. But think about that type of feeling, and we don't want our learners to experience that. It's aversive, it stings. You know, I want my learners to be happy. I'm gonna be measuring that. I'm gonna be measuring and investigating whether my learners are coming to the instructional material and location willingly. Are they smiling, right? Is there escape maintained behaviors? Am I getting a lot of avoidance type behaviors? And if so, that learner is not ready to learn. There needs some help at that emotional level to make sure all those things are addressed. So we can do that with appropriate sequencing and analyzing of material, so the instructional design component in this content analysis, as well as effective teaching strategies to reduce negative emotional responding. So we can make learning a lot easier for our learners. And that too is going to reduce that negative emotional responding. So we should always be planning for the emotional level of learning in our instructional sequence. The second domain that we're going to be focusing, so after we have the emotional level of learning in the back of our minds, let's look at column 1, which is the psychomotor domain of learning. So with psychomotor learning, this is any single or multiple physical response, often viewed as movement of muscles in a precise way. So I want you to think of how a behavior is performed. So examples include cleaning up blocks, setting a table, playing an instrument, pinching a pencil. Think of vocal muscular. So am I able to produce the sounds? So how to do the behavior. Non-examples include answering math facts, requesting a ball, writing a book, using a map. Those are non-examples because those are specific instances of behavior of when to engage in it. So I really want you to think of, with psychomotor, it's how a behavior is actually performed. So there's 3 kinds of learning that make up this domain: responses, chains, and kinesthetic repertoires. So let's jump into responses. Responses are the simplest motor behavior. It is performing a single motor behavior. So think of the most simple behaviors that are motor behaviors that are going to underlie all additional motor behaviors. So some examples that come from the precision teaching literature: the big 6+6. We briefly talked about that earlier. So these are the most basic motor skills that underlie most, if not all, motoric behaviors. So reaching, pointing, touching, grasping, placing, releasing, twisting, pulling, pushing, tapping, squeezing, shaking. Right? Those are all fine motor behaviors. Not all fine motor behaviors, but those are all very simple motor behaviors, and they're single response. Additional examples of responses are vocal muscles. So opening your mouth, making sounds, and being able to produce those sounds. Some non-examples are writing a story about your childhood. That involves a lot of chains of behaviors and other relevant stimuli in the environment. Sharpening a pencil is a non-example. That involves multiple steps. So it's a series of behaviors, so it's a non-example. Dialing a phone is a non-example. Drawing a picture is a non-example. Again, those are multiple steps within that. So as we move up, I want you to recognize that we went from a simple response, and as we move up that column, they get more complex. So above responses are chains. And chains, I want you to think of chaining in the behavior analytic literature. This is the connection of multiple motor responses in a sequence to form a complex or chained response. So think back to old units on chaining, forwards, backwards, total task. So some examples of this is operating scientific equipment, sharpening a pencil, so there's multiple steps there, serving a tennis ball, so one response, swing is 2 responses, right? So multiple behaviors chained together. Some non-examples are playing a variety of new tennis opponents, So because they're new and you've never been exposed to them, that's more complex than just chaining responses together. Swinging a racket's a non-example. That's a single motor behavior. Grabbing a ball is a non-example. Again, that's a single motor behavior. So we had responses, we moved up to chains. The most complex in this domain is the kinesthetic repertoire. And that is a fluent interaction of simple responses and motor chains in response to ever-changing and appropriate stimuli. So this means you've not experienced this combination before, but you're able to move and use those simple responses and chains in regard to it. So an example of this is playing a variety of new tennis opponents. So you're engaging in simple responses and chained responses, even though you've never practiced those orders, because you're following the ever-changing environment, right? That's our goal. That's where we want to get people. Driving a truck in response to different traffic patterns. So you're able to navigate and use your truck and drive that truck in relation to new, never before seen traffic patterns, and you're able to do so freely. Non-examples are turning a steering wheel, right? That's too simple. Starting the car, serving a tennis ball. So let's practice. So I want you to pause the video here and think, is this a response chain or kinesthetic repertoire? And then unpause it when you have your answers. Pinching a clothespin, go ahead and pause that. All right, so that's a basic response, right? One single response. Turning a doorknob. That too is a response. So think, right? Turning the doorknob. So not how to open a door, but just turning. Shooting a bow and arrow. That's a chain. There's multiple steps involved there. Creating a new interpretive dance to a song you've never heard. Spot on. That's a kinesthetic repertoire. Being able to wrestle a new opponent and use several different holds and techniques. Kinesthetic repertoire again. Nice job. Changing a light bulb. That's a chain. So you have a lot. You have the twist, right? You have the release, you have the grasp, you have the twist again. So there's multiple simple responses in there. Shuffling a deck of cards. That is a chain as well. Opening your mouth. A response. Nice job. So just like when we moved up, we built complexity, so responses, chains, and kinesthetic repertoires. I also want you to think of, as we move from left to right, they get more complex as well. So our second column, or column 2, is simple cognitive responding. So let's see what's in this domain. Simple cognitive learning, I want you to think of as basic stimulus-response relations, sequences, and expansive detailed chained responses. So these are, for example, things like you see the letter and say the name of the letter. You recite a friend's phone number. You tell a fable. You label one picture of a dog as a dog. Non-examples are learning that a fish includes tuna, redfish, and grouper. Learning and applying that if an animal has a backbone, it's a vertebrate. So these are more conceptual. So learning that a fish has multiple species within it or types of fish within it, and correctly identifying new instances of fish is well beyond just seeing one thing and responding. And learning the rule that if an animal has a backbone, it's a vertebrate. So that is more complex than just memorizing the definition of a vertebrate. So there are 3 kinds of learning that make up this simple cognitive domain, and that's associations, sequences, and that should say verbal repertoire. So let's jump in. An association is in the presence of a particular stimulus, the learner must remember a particular response. So this is a stimulus response. The same stimulus will always evoke the same response. So seeing a map symbol and saying the meaning of that map symbol. So this means north. This means it's a waterway. Seeing the letter H and saying the name H. Completing a page of math facts. So seeing 3 + 2 and writing or saying 5. Non-examples include responding to all different kinds of dog as a dog. So again, that's more of a stimulus class rather than one stimulus producing one response. Stating whether or not an object rolls after learning the rule, round things rolls. So more complex and actually the application. Solving multi-step multiplication problems. So that's an algorithm. So although you're going to be doing the same thing every time, it's more than just one particular stimulus evoking one particular response. And I want you to think about it this way, or in two ways. With associations, your teaching and testing stimuli are always going to be the same. 2 plus 2 will always be 4. The sound for T is going to be T, always. So the teaching and testing stimuli are going to be the same. And I want you to think associations are when the learner should respond. So psychomotor is how they respond. And I want you to think of associations as when they engage in those specific. So think about psychomotor as being able to produce sounds. An association would be hearing the sound, and the learner repeating the sound, So it's now using that psychomotor response in the presence of a stimulus. Getting more complex from here are sequences. And sequences, there's an emphasis on sequences of verbal discriminations. So when to do what. So these can be fixed or flexible. So they can be in the same order or flexible. It doesn't matter the order. So a fixed sequence would be stating your friend's phone number. So you need to, that's going to be fixed, right? You get one number wrong, it's going to mess up the outcome. Following the algorithm, divide, multiply, subtract, bring down. So that's a fixed sequence when we're using an algorithm to solve a math problem. Stating the term to a definition or stating the definition to a term. So stating the definition can be flexible. I can rearrange some of the words in that and still have the definition be correct. I'm not applying the definition, but if I said reinforcement is when a stimulus follows a response and that response increases, that would count as a definition of reinforcement. Or I can say the response contingent presentation of a stimulus resulting in an increased frequency of that response. That would be an example of positive reinforcement. So the wording's a little bit different, but would still count as an instance. Non-examples would be discussing U.S. presidents and recounting notable event with specific years, not ears. I mean, maybe you want to know about the president's ears, but not me. So with this is not just a sequence of behavior. This is very complex to be able to demonstrate subject mastery by talking through facts, figures, notable events. Same thing with discussing facts about your life. That's more complex than just a series of verbal discriminations. And I want you to think here that you engage in multiple responses and associations in response to the stimuli. The most complex within simple cognitive learning are verbal repertoires. And those are fluent talking or writing at great length and depth about a topic under the control of sequences both pre-planned and novel. So just like kinesthetic repertoires, this is going to be ever-changing to these novel, never-before-seen patterns of behavior. And this is when we would deem someone as an expert. So this is when we're talking about discussing U.S. presidents and recounting notable events with specific years. This is when we're talking about discussing facts about your life. As a professor, this is when I'm up there giving a lecture on schedules of reinforcement or real-life examples of reinforcement or natural reinforcement versus arbitrary reinforcement. I also want you to think with verbal repertoires, I always think of like sports commentators, how they're able to see the players doing new things, right? And being able to talk through what they're doing in all those different orders. Some non-examples include stating your friend's phone number. So again, that's a sequence. Following the algorithm, divide, multiply, subtract, bring down. That's another sequence. And then stating the definition for reinforcement. That's a sequence. That's not talking about reinforcement in great lengths as an expert. All right, so we're gonna do some more practice. I want you to tell me, is this an association, a sequence, or a verbal repertoire? Seeing a note on a sheet of music and saying see. Basic association, good. So it's stimulus produces or evokes the same response every time. Being able to do a radio interview about ABA in your company. Sweet beans, that's a verbal repertoire, absolutely. A DJ, being able to really discuss new songs and the musical influences in the song. Verbal repertoire, absolutely. Saying the alphabet in order from A to Z. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. A sequence, absolutely. Saying the rule I before E after C, except after C. So not using it, just saying it. That's a sequence as well. Stating that a noun is a person, place, or thing. Sequence 2, nice job. Seeing the letter A and saying, ah, an association, good. So stimulus produces the same response. Seeing your mom and saying, mom. That's an association too, nice job. All right, now let's do a cumulative review. Is this a response, a chain, kinesthetic repertoire, association, sequence, or verbal repertoire? Pulling a rope. Simple response, right? That pull response. Singing the names of the states in alphabetical order. Alabama and Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas. Sequence, nice job. Physically being able to produce sounds. Response, absolutely. Baking a cake. It's a chain, right? So it's a chain of these motoric behaviors, absolutely. Describing the history of behavior analysis, including key people, dates, dates of discoveries, and major publications. Verbal repertoire, good. All right, so let's move into column 3, because that's where the magic happens. That's the really, really higher order learning that we want to see for most of our learners. So that's what we typically call column 3. So think of column 2 as almost like facts. Column 3 is actually application, actually doing something. So with complex cognitive, this is going to be the most complex of all the 3 columns. Not saying that the other 2 aren't important, but there's a different type of stimulus control that occurs in column 3. And with complex cognitive learning, the learner applies and integrates previous learning to new contexts. So example, learning that tuna and salmon are fish and correctly identifying rockfish as a fish. So never learning before about rockfish, but able to apply that rule. Applying a note-taking strategy that you learned in English class to your history class. So taking something learned in one context and using it in another. Classifying novel scenarios that you've never seen before as reinforcement. Non-examples include stating the definition of reinforcement. So that's simple, right? That's in that sequence. That's simple learning. Teaching students to say the rules of note-taking. So just stating a rule doesn't mean you can apply it. So let me say that again. Stating a rule doesn't mean you can apply it. Stating when to use extinction doesn't mean I can apply when to use extinction. Stating when 2 vowels go walking, the first does the talking, doesn't mean I can see EA and say that makes the E sound. Teaching students to name the meanings of map symbols. So that's a basic association, right? So I'm seeing a map symbol and I'm saying the meaning. Now with complex cognitive learning, always, 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 the teaching and testing stimuli are gonna be different. So what you teach with is going to differ from what you test with. And there are 3 kinds of learning that make up this domain: concepts, principles and rule application, and strategies, or I'll refer to them as generative repertoires. So concepts. Concepts are when the learner responds to the presence of certain critical features within a class of stimuli or events in a context of features that vary from instance to instance. So that means I can correctly identify novel stimuli as an instance of the concept because there are these critical features present, regardless of all the variable features that don't make something a concept. So for example, learning that a tuna and salmon are fish and correctly identifying rockfish as a fish. And some variable features that don't comprise an instance might be the size of the fish, or how many gills are on the fish, or the number of scales, or the color of the fish. Those aren't relevant to what makes a fish, but I can still correctly identify that rockfish as a fish. Classifying a novel scenario as reinforcement would be an example of a concept. Classifying novel shapes as either square or rectangle. So it's never before seen instances of shape. I can say that's a square and that's a rectangle. Non-examples include stating the definition of reinforcement. So just because I can say what reinforcement is doesn't mean I can correctly identify instances of reinforcement throughout examples and non-examples. Teaching to students to say the rules of note-taking. So just stating a rule doesn't mean I can use it. So that's living in column 2, just stating the rules of note-taking. Seeing a triangle you were taught and saying triangle. So because the teaching and testing stimuli are the same, that's column 2, that's an association. So by just seeing the same triangle that I learned was a triangle and saying triangle is not conceptual. That is memorization of that association. Moving up from concepts, we have principles. And a principle is a rule that states the relationship between 2 or more concepts, and an individual can use the rule in novel situations that contain certain features in a context of features that vary from instance to instance. So it's taking these rules now and applying them. So again, relationship of concepts. So if we looked at 2 concepts, round things and rolling, to create the rule that round things roll, and then a learner can correctly identify that this pen will roll, and this can of nuts will roll, and this bottle of allergy medicine will roll. But this hairbrush will not roll because it's not round. And they can say to any new stimulus that they've never seen, whether or not it will roll. This old school container of photographs, when we have to get them developed, will not roll. But this glass will roll because it's round. Let's look at another rule. Reinforcers, one concept, increase to the second concept, behavior. So I can say candy is a reinforcer. When I apply it to hand raising, will hand raising increase, right? And I can use those to apply then that rule. If an animal has a backbone, it is a vertebrate animal, right? So we can teach that rule, or we can teach the rule of using a map to get to a new location. And the learner can use any map to get to any new location. Those are all principle or rule application. Non-examples are teaching the students to say the rules of note-taking. Again, that's column 2. Teaching the concept of north, teaching the meaning of map symbols. Those are all living in that concept of north is concept, right, in column 3. Teaching the meaning of map symbols is living in column 2. So then the most complex kind of learning within column 3 are strategies or generative repertoires. And these are behaviors that help a learner create novel recombinations of already existing behaviors. So they create a novel instance of behavior never before done as a function of novel stimulus conditions without previous instruction or programming. So we arrange repertoires that specifically allow the learner to recombine already existing behaviors because these novel stimulus conditions recruit that repertoire or recruit that response. And we're teaching these repertoires that allows for those recombinations of behavior. So talk aloud problem solving, or TAPS, is an excellent example of a generative repertoire you can teach, or a question generating repertoire. So in my classes, I had students generate questions about the readings prior to doing the reading and try to answer those questions and then go back and see after they've done the reading if they could figure out the answer to their question without having to actually read the material, and then fill in the gaps for any missing piece. Some non-examples are if an animal has a backbone, it's a vertebrate animal. So that's, again, living in that principle or rule. Using a map to get to a new location and stating the definition of reinforcement are all non-examples of strategies or generative repertoires. So let's practice here. So is it a concept, principle, rule, application, or strategies? Circling a verb in a sentence. So go ahead and hit pause. That's a concept. So being able to identify novel instances of a verb, so running, jumping, swinging, and being able to circle them. Seeing a new bird and correctly identifying it as a bird. It's a concept too, right? So including something as a member within a class, a stimulus class, or excluding a member as or excluding an instance as a member of the stimulus class. Asking yourself a series of questions in response to a novel problem and being able to come to a solution. Strategies or generative repertoires, good job. Reading new words with G in it. After learning, when a G is followed by an I or an E, it makes the J sound. Otherwise, it says the G sound. Principal rule application, nice job. All right, so this is a cumulative review. So it can be any of the 9 types of learning or kinds of learning that we talked about. Stating the rule, when a G is followed by an I or an E, it makes the J sound. Otherwise, it says the G sound. Sequence, good. So that's limiting column 2. Nice job. Student spelling believe correctly after learning I before E except after C. Principle or rule applying. Nice job with that. Okay. So I'm going to go into now analyzing the kind of learning even further. So we talked about identifying the kinds of learning inherent in each component. Now we're going to talk about analyzing the kinds of learning with either a task analysis or a features analysis. So let's jump in now and look at how we can do a features analysis. So as we were talking about, we may need to further break down the kinds of learning by doing one of 2 types of analyses. We can do a task analysis, or we can do what's called a features analysis. Now, there's a lot of great training programs on task analyses already. So we're going to focus more on a features analysis, as that's something that's less common in behavioral literature and training literature in general. So with a task analysis, we may use that for teaching chains such as sharpening a pencil, sequencing or sequences such as how to solve a double-digit math problem, right? What are the steps of that? Simple responses such as how to write the number 2. Those are all appropriate for a task analysis. However, when we're looking at identifying those critical features that comprise a stimulus class or stimulus set, we're going to be looking at doing a features analysis. And we're going to do those primarily with concepts in column 3 and those principles in column 3 as well. And when we're creating curriculum and programs in applied behavior analysis, especially for our learners with autism, we really need to analyze what kind of learning we want to achieve with our instruction. For example, many TACTs should be taught as concepts and not association. But I don't see that often when I go and consult. What I'll see is an individual will use the same 3 pictures of a dog, and then once the learner meets mastery criteria for that, they use the same 3 sets to then assess their performance on assessments like the VB-MAP or the ABLS. But 3 instances of a dog does not mean the learner can correctly identify novel instances of that concept. So they've learned 3 instances of a dog, but that's column 2 still. Those are basic associations. We have no evidence that the learner has really learned the concept of dog or dogness and all the different types of dogs. You know, can they see a Great Dane and say that's a dog, and a poodle and say it's a dog, and a Chihuahua and say it's a dog? Can they see a fox and know that that's not a dog? And if they see a cat, do they know that's not a dog? And remember, with simple cognitive, teaching and testing stimuli are often the same, especially with associations. Teaching and testing are always the same. And with the complex, we're always assessing and testing with novel stimuli, never before seen, to see if it's those critical features that are controlling the response, rather than rote memorization of individual stimuli. So we're going to focus mostly on concept analysis and concept instruction, but the same principles can be applied for principle and rule application. So let's further define concept. Concept is a set of stimuli, so it's more than 1, that share more than 1 property with all members involved. So it's a set of stimuli that share more than one property with all those members involved. So for example, we can have the concept of a dog. So down here you see that there's a variety of different dogs, and they're different colors, they're different sizes, their fur's different, their ears are different, some have open mouths, some have closed mouths, the distance between their eyes are different, but all of these would qualify as an instance of a dog. So there are some common features that exist among all of these that indicate their membership within the class of dog, right? And there are features that vary, that have no bearing on what is a dog or is not a dog, such as fur length, tail length, type of ears, and color. Those don't define dog, but they vary. So we want our learners to correctly identify each of these instances as a dog. So for a concept, for something to be a concept, it has to have a range of examples. So a non-example of a concept is Chicago. There's only one Chicago. However, I can teach the concept of city, in which Chicago would qualify, Seattle would qualify, Washington, D.C. would qualify, and then I can test with, can the learner correctly identify Philadelphia as a city, Minneapolis as a city, Savannah as a city. A non-example of a concept are the numbers 7, 8, 9. Right, those are associations. I'm going to see that shaped 7 and say that's a 7. However, I can turn that into an example of a concept by teaching the concept of a numeral. So I can teach with 1, 8, 20, 1000 and test with 7, 13, 42. Another non-example is the definition of what a pet is. So a definition doesn't mean I can classify and correctly identify and reject instances as either an example or a non-example of that conceptual class. However, when I want to teach the concept of pets, I can do that because there's a variety of different pets, right? There are fish and lizards and guinea pigs and hamsters and dogs and cats and ferrets and birds. So what I want you to do is pause the video here, and I want you to circle the ones that are concepts so we can see what is a concept and what is not a concept. So go ahead and pause that, and I'll review the answers with you all. All right, so let's go through these. So pi, that is not a concept. There's only one sequence of numbers that is pi, so that's a non-example. A right triangle is a concept. So although there are critical features, the size, the color, the orientation, all those things can vary. So a right triangle is a concept. Cats is a concept. A portrait is a concept. The Mona Lisa is not a concept because there's only one Mona Lisa. Humans, that is a concept. And in basic literature, you can see that pigeons will peck in the presence of a picture of a human and not peck in the absence of a picture of a human. Dr. Andrew J. Bulla is not a concept. There's only one of me, and some people might say, thank God for that. My lizard Petey, for the same reason, is not a concept. Stephen King's novel It is not a concept. There's only one of that. However, a novel is a concept. Positive reinforcement is a concept. The founder of behaviorism is not a concept. M makes the sound, and T makes the T sound. That's not a concept. The definition of positive reinforcement, not a concept. Addition is a concept. And what a name is absolutely a concept. So we can teach the concept of what a name is. Now, for us to say that a learner has learned a concept, we're going to be testing and we're going to be training, we're planning to teach conceptual control and testing and assessing that we achieved conceptual control. So conceptual control has two parts. One, stimulus generalization within a stimulus class, and stimulus discrimination between different classes. So what does this mean? Well, our first feature is that stimulus generalization within a stimulus class has to occur. So when the learner gives the same response to new untaught examples. So the learner has never seen any of these pictures, and they say, that's a dog, that's a dog, that's a dog, that's a dog, that's a dog. So all of those are correctly identified as dogs, even though the learner has never seen these instances before. So that's one part of conceptual control. The second part of conceptual control is stimulus discrimination between stimulus classes. So this is differential responding in the presence of examples and non-examples. So that means the learner rejects members with outside of the stimulus class. So they say that does not belong here. That is not an instance of this concept. So for example, only this picture is correctly identified as a dog, and the learner correctly rejects these three as instances of a dog. So they reject a cat as a dog, this baby pony as a dog, and this fox as a dog. They correctly reject those. They say, nope, that's not a dog. So they discriminate between stimulus classes. So we need to make sure that both of those things are occurring for us to say that we've taught a concept or we have conceptual control. Now, when we're planning for our discrimination between stimulus classes, we have to be very strategic with the types of stimuli we're using as our non-examples. So for example, which do you think is an easier discrimination? The dog and the baby bear, or the dog and the Coca-Cola? Well, hopefully you all said the dog and the Coca-Cola is far easier. They share almost no features with one another. However, the bear and the dog share multiple features with each other, making those more likely to be confused by the learner. So when we're teaching and planning our instruction and designing our instruction, we want to make sure that we're teaching those fine discriminations between that dog and that bear. Because a learner is probably not going to struggle with the difference between that Coca-Cola and the dog. And I look back at my early ABA days when I would just randomly pick cards to teach as part of a tacting program or a listener responding program. And I didn't give any thought as to why I was selecting these stimuli. So I'd have an apple, a dog, and a fork. And all of those look so different from one another. And they would label them, and I would test, and I would say they learned the concept. However, when I would introduce new stimuli, such as a red ball or a tomato, the learner would say apple. I would say, oh, they're overgeneralizing. Well, that's true because I didn't give much consideration to the stimuli that I selected to teach. So when we're planning for our instruction, we want to teach with what's called close-in non-examples. So close-in non-examples are comparison stimuli that are similar to the concept, but just differ slightly enough to make it a non-example. So I like to think of it as it looks like the concept, it smells like the concept, but it ain't the concept, right? So it's ever so similar, but just slightly different enough that it's now functions as a non-example of that concept. With far out non-examples, those are comparison stimuli that are not similar to the concept, and they differ greatly in critical features, making it a non-example. So those are so far removed from the concept that we wouldn't ever expect the learner to confuse that with the concept we're trying to teach. So we want to teach with our close-in non-examples as our comparison stimuli. So if we were teaching the concept of a rectangle, I'm going to have these three shapes: parallelogram, a square, and a diamond. Notice that they look like a rectangle. They're very close, but they differ ever so slightly. So all of these close-in non-examples have four sides. The difference between this shape and the rectangle is the 90-degree angles. There's no four 90-degree angles, although it has two sides that are longer than the other. This square is a close-in non-example because it has four 90-degree angles, but all the sides are equal, which makes it a non-example of a rectangle. This diamond is a non-example because it has four sides, but the two sides aren't longer than the other, and there's no four 90-degree angles. So notice, well, before I get there, And if we had far out examples, far out non-examples, we see that these are so different that we wouldn't anticipate the learner confusing circle, lightning bolt, or teardrop with the rectangle. They share almost no features with the concept of the rectangle that we're teaching. And notice here that when we think about which stimuli the learner is more likely to get confused with the concept that we're teaching, it's those close and non-examples. Those are the ones that typically learners have a difficult time with when we're teaching and testing. So we want to program with those from the start to show that discrimination up front. And then if we can get that, we get all of these far out non-examples for free. So I can teach that these aren't the same, and then without having to do any teaching, the learner automatically excludes these because they are so different that this is not where they're going to get confused. So here's a diagram that my colleague Deb Brown and I created to show where we want to target our teaching and testing examples and non-examples. So I want you to think of the blue circle as everything that the concept entails. That's the entire presence of the concept. And everything that lives inside that blue circle is an instance of the concept. So if we had dogs, that's every single dog would fall within that blue circle. However, the further out we get on that circle, the weirder and more challenging the examples are of that concept. And the further in the middle of that circle, the easier. So in the middle of the concept, we might have, let's say, a Labrador Retriever. We tend to see a Labrador Retriever quite frequently in our day-to-day contact with what a dog is. However, as we move further outside, we get some far out examples that the learner sometimes will confuse, such as a Great Dane might live in here, a Chihuahua, a dog that maybe got hit by a car and only has 3 legs. One of those hairless dogs. So those are the instances of dogs that learners are more likely to confuse. All right, and the orange that surrounds it, those are all the different non-examples that can take place. So those are all the different non-examples that live out in the world. As we move closer in, we get more and more similar to the concept. So some non-examples that live around here might be that fox, that cat, that baby horse, the baby bear. Those are the instances that an individual is more likely to confuse with a dog. But as we see with our examples that get further out, those far out non-examples, it might be a parrot or a plastic French fry toy would be those non-examples. Those are so far out that I'm not thinking the learner's gonna make errors there. So when I'm teaching and testing, I want to select those far out examples that are some of the harder instances within that concept class, and then I want to teach the close in non-examples. And if I can get discrimination between those, then I can get everything else for free. I can get discrimination between all these further out non-examples for free, and I don't have to teach them. Same thing, if I can get the learner to generalize within those far out examples, then I'm going to get those close in examples for free or with very, very minimum instruction. That's my dog in the background. Now, for our learners with autism, sometimes we have to start a little bit further out, but we don't want to say they've mastered the program until we move in and they can discriminate between those close and non-examples. So there may be some modifications that we need to do with our young learners with autism, but we still want to ensure that before we say that they have learned a concept, that they can discriminate between those far out examples and close in non-examples. Okay. So we talked about that there has to be stimulus generalization within the class, stimulus discrimination between stimulus classes. For us to be sure that the learner has acquired conceptual behavior, there's a need for new specimens. To truly get evidence of concept learning, an individual has to generalize within the class, discriminate between the stimulus class, in the presence of novel test items, both examples and non-examples. And this is going to be the biggest takeaway. This is a principle that I'm going to get tattooed on my arm right here. teaching and testing examples and non-examples always need to be different. They always need to be different. And this is something, as I reflect back to my early days as a BCBA, when I would teach and assess with the same materials. I would use the same materials that I taught with as my assessment materials for the VB-MAP. And I look back and I'm like, I wish I knew this early on. I really wish I knew this early on, because, you know, as we would reassess with the VB-MAP, the learners would lose skills. And I would say, why? And I hate to say this, but I would blame the disability. I say, oh, well, individuals with autism tend to regress with their skills. But in actuality, it most likely was a result of my instructional design, where I didn't really teach the concept. I taught associations and I assessed with associations, but anytime we assess with different materials, I would see a loss of skills. And it was because I didn't program my teaching to the type of learning that I was hoping to acquire from the learner. So it's difficult to look back and say like, oh, I wish I knew that, now. But I'm so happy that I did learn this. I'm able to share this information with you all, because I think that of all the things that I've learned throughout my career as a behavior analyst, this was the most eye-opening, and it helped change and shape my profession tenfold. All right, so let's talk about how we can analyze our concepts to get those critical features identified, as well as our variable features. And when we do this, we can then begin to create our stimulus sets for teaching and assessing. And this is such a cool analysis, a features analysis, because it really helps with the design and selection of your stimuli that you're going to teach with. So a concept analysis is the strategy of identifying a concept. So whether it be the concept of a car, the concept of a vehicle, or maybe the concept of what a microaggression is, and analyzing that into both the critical and variable features. Those critical features, I want you to think of them being as must-have features, as Joe Layng would say. So these are the features that that instances must have for it to be an instance of the concept. So these are features that are required in every instance of the concept, and if any single one of them is missing, it no longer functions as an example of the concept. Variable features, I want you to think of those as the can-have features, as Joe Layng would say. And those are features that are present during examples of the concept. However, they do not define what the concept is. They have no say on the, whether or not something is included as an instance of the concept or not. So they vary across instances. What we can do is analyze any concept into its critical and variable features. So let's say we wanted to do a concept of a chair. We want to do a concept analysis of a chair. And what is a chair? What makes something a chair? So if we look at our critical features, we can identify that a chair seats one person, a chair has a back, and the person sitting, their legs are supported at a 90-degree angle. So all of our instances within our stimulus set and our teaching materials have to make sure that those three critical features are there. Our variable features that don't define what a chair is and can vary amongst instances are the number of legs. So does the chair have 4 legs, 2 legs, 1 leg, no legs? The material, is it wood, metal, plastic, other? The shape of the chair, is it flat planed or curvaceous? What's the size of the back? Is it a high back, medium back, or low back? All those can vary within the chair, but it's not going to determine membership. So what we want to do then what we can do then from this analysis is that we can create a divergent set of examples to show the full variety of all the different things that a chair can be. And this is going to hit on those far out examples, the ones that the learner may confuse during teaching and learning. So we're going to provide a variety of examples of a chair to get the full range of close in and far out examples. And when we're selecting our examples, we want to select stimuli that include all the variable features we identified. What this means then is of all the features that we've identified, we need to vary them at least once throughout our entire set of examples. So let's take a look at some examples of a chair. So you see that we have our variable features 1C, 2C, 3B, and 4A. This is a chair, right? Seats one person, their legs are supported at a 90-degree angle, and it has a back. This is a chair, although we see that there's some differences in the color, flat beam, back, a number of legs. This too is a chair with these variable features. This is a chair with these variable features, different materials functioning. This is a chair. Notice the baby's feet are supported at a 90-degree angle there. This too is a chair. This sits on that curvaceous piece, right? So all of these are instances of a chair. Now that addresses the stimulus generalization piece. We also need to select our stimuli for stimulus discrimination between classes. So based on our analysis, we can select our close-in non-examples. Because remember, if any of the critical features are missing, we have a non-example. And those that are close-in non-examples or the closest non-examples to the concept, those are only missing one of the critical features. So we want to make sure that our non-example set, we're only removing one of those critical features to get our non-examples. So if we see here, lacks critical feature 3, so the legs are not supported at a 90-degree angle. This couch lacks critical feature 1, it seats more than one person. This stool lacks critical feature 2, it doesn't have a back. This bench sits more than one person. This stool doesn't have a back. This chase, is that what that's called? A chase lounge? Legs are not supported at a 90-degree angle, so that's a non-example. So look at these and identify that these are going to be the ones that the learner confuses as instances of a chair because they're so close into the concept, right? We're likely to see learners say these are chairs and confuse these. So if we teach them together as this is a chair, this is not a chair, this is a chair, this is not a chair, this is a chair, this is not a chair, and the learner is better able to grasp that concept, especially if they can then demonstrate that response in the presence of novel teaching and, or novel testing stimuli. So to effectively teach this concept then, we need to identify our minimal rational set. And what that means, it's a set of stimuli that illustrates every dimension of every variable feature. Each variable feature should be demonstrated once, and you need a minimal rational set for both teaching and testing. So immediately in our programming, we should be thinking, how many stimuli do I need to show the full range of examples and non-examples? We can do this with any concept. So here's an example of the concept of a biography. And this comes from Sue Markle's book, Analyzing Instructional Content, again, available through Morningside Press. So if we're looking at the concept of a biography, critical feature 1 has a history of a single person. Critical feature 2, written by someone other than the subject. Critical feature 3, written in prose. And critical feature 4, non-fiction. Then we have our variable attributes. Final published form, an entire book or a section of a book. That can vary. Moral purpose of the book, didactic or non-didactic. That can vary. The author's attitude towards the subject, positive, neutral, negative. That can vary. Method of author, objective or non-objective. Again, that varies. And then depth of the study, covers external events of the subject's life, throws some light on the subject's inner state, attempts to penetrate psychology of the subject. Again, those can vary. Those don't define what a biography is or is not. Then we can get our teaching and testing examples from this. So our teaching examples, you see every variable feature is varied at least once with these 3. And our teaching non-examples, because there's 4 critical features, I need to remove 1 at a time So I'm always going to have the same number of non-examples in my minimal rational set, the same number of non-examples as there are critical features. So if there's 4 critical features, immediately I need at least 4 non-examples because I'm systematically removing one at a time. I then create my minimal rational testing set. So I then have new examples and new non-examples so I can see if conceptual learning has emerged for the learner. So let's do one together. Let's practice how this might look when teaching a new concept. So we're going to be teaching the concept of Van Gogh style. So not who Van Gogh is, right? That is column 2. This is Van Gogh style. So there are 3 critical features for Van Gogh style. 1, the forms are darkly outlined. 2, the colors used are intense in tone. And 3, the brush strokes are energized. So all 3 of those needs to be present for an instance to be a member of Van Gogh style. And since I have 3 critical features, I need to have at least 3 non-examples because I'm going to remove one of those features at a time. My variable features, the subject matter, so it can be a portrait, landscape, or still life. And 2, the color scheme. It can be cool colors, it can be warm colors. So let's look at some examples. This is an example of Van Gogh style. I see that the forms are darkly outlined, the colors used are intense in tone, and those brush strokes are energized. I can see them. This is an example of Van Gogh style. So I see the forms are darkly outlined, especially with the birds and the path here. The colors that are used are intense in tone, and those brush strokes, again, are energized. Notice that we're starting to vary, right? This is a landscape. This is a non-example. So we see that the forms are darkly outlined, the colors used are intense in tone, and the brush strokes are energized. And you can see it on the vase more and the wall. Notice that it's varying though. This is still life. This too is an example of Van Gogh style. Forms darkly outlined, check. Brush strokes are energized, check. And the colors that are used are intense in tone, check. However, notice that these are cooler colors rather than warmer colors. Now let's look at our non-examples. So we're going to remove one critical feature. Forms are not darkly outlined. So we see the brush strokes are energized, we see intense color tone, but there's no darkly outlined figures. This is a non-example. So I see dark outlines, energized strokes. However, the colors used are not intense in tone. This is a non-example. So I see those really intense colors. I see dark outlines. However, I don't see the energized brushstrokes. So that's a non-example. So let's see if you can identify whether or not something is Van Gogh style or not. So let's take a look. So I want you to pause this video and tell me, is this an example of Van Gogh style? Absolutely. There's darkly outlined figures, right? Brushstrokes, energized, intense tones, not cones. Is this an example of Van Gogh style? No way, it lacks critical feature 3. Absolutely, I don't see any intense brushstrokes. Is this an example of Van Gogh style? Nope, forms are not darkly outlined. Is this an example of Van Gogh style? Yeah, it is, heck yeah. It meets all 3 of our critical features. Is this an example of Van Gogh style? Nope. Not intense in tone, right? We see lots of whites, but we don't see the intense tonal colors. Is this an example of Van Gogh style? Yes, it is, absolutely. And that's actually, Van Gogh did a self-portrait in this one, right back there. So you can see little Van Gogh there. Is this an example of Van Gogh style? Yes, it is. Nice job. So this one confuses people sometimes because they say he's not darkly outlined, but if you really look, you can see the outline around this gentleman. All right, so we just finished up with features analysis, and let's jump back into the fourth area of instructional design that we're going to cover today, and that is to prescribe learning channels now for each of these components we've identified earlier. So we have our component skills, we've identified the kinds of learning, we've done the features analysis, we have our stimuli, now we're going to prescribe these learning channels. So what are learning channels? Well, learning channels is going to be the last point or the last piece that we need to then build specific pinpoints for teaching. Now, we've done our component composite analysis. We're going to pinpoint the behavior now with our learning channel. So learning channels describe the sensory contact that the learner is going to make with the instructional material and the specific response output we expect the learner to do. So for example, the learner can see the word problem and write the correct answer, or they will see the letter and say the name of the letter. So that might be tacting letters. They can say the sounds, so echoic, so they hear the sound and they say the sound. So when we're thinking of learning channels, we need to know both the stimulus contact and the behavioral output. So when I'm talking about stimulus input or stimulus contact, I want you to think of how the learner makes sensory contact with the word or whatever the stimulus materials are that we created. So how are they contacting the stimuli? Are they seeing it, hearing it, feeling it, tasting it, smelling it, etc.? Now, not only how are they contacting, experiencing it, but what do we want them to do? What's the specific behavior or the action that we want them to do? So are they going to write it? Will they say it? Will they do it? Will they select it? Now, Eric Houghton created this learning channel matrix to help inform and help us create different pinpoints and create our learning channels. So if we look at the vertical side, we see the specific sensory contacts. So are they thinking it, touching it, tasting it, sniffing it, seeing it, hearing it, feeling it? And then we have all the behavioral outputs we can think of. So we have aim, do, draw, emote, mark, match, say, select, tap, thought, and write. Now, one thing that we like to do is sometimes we try to fill in all the different channels for a topic that we're covering. So for example, if I was teaching vegetables, I might have them think of their favorite vegetable and draw it. So that's a think draw. Or I might have them touch the vegetable and say the name. They can taste the vegetable and say the name or we can go to an emote, tell us how they feel. They can sniff the vegetable, right? They can see the vegetable and draw it. They can see the vegetable and say the name. They can see the vegetable and select. They can see the vegetable and match it with an identical one. Hear, so they can hear the vegetable's name and say whether or not they like it, and etc. So they can feel, so what are their feelings towards the vegetable, and then they can say that. So let's practice. So I want you to think of what the learning channel is, and then I want you to say it in your head and then unpause the video. So a person reading a book out loud, what would the learning channel be there? So go ahead and pause the video. Good, that would be a see-say. So they're seeing the words and they're saying them. Answering math facts by using paper and pencil. That's a see right. So they're seeing the math fact and they're writing the answer. Circling things that are in the wrong place in a picture. That's see mark. So they're not writing anything, right? They're marking up a paper. So it's not that they're writing what's missing. They're circling, they're marking up. Copying words from the board to your notebook. See right. So they're seeing the words on the board, and they're writing them in their notebook. Taking notes during a lecture. That one's hear right. So they're hearing the words from the teacher's mouth, and then they're either writing with point-to-point correspondence or they're summarizing. Sitting at your desk and creating a story. That one's free write or think write, right? So you're thinking of the story and you're writing it down. Answering a question asked by the teacher. Hearsay, so I'm hearing the question and I'm saying the answer. Counting out loud from 0 to 100. That's free say or think say, right? So they're just able to go from 0 to 100. Dialing a phone number you know by heart. Free do. So you're able to freely then do, right? Do. Right. So the do, typically we have to add some additional words to that. So it'd be free do dials number, because what are you actually doing? Looking up a phone number online and dialing it. On see do, right? So now you're seeing the number and then you're pressing the keys. The teacher points to a number and the student says the name out loud. See say. So they see the number, they say the number. Good. Listening to a reader and giving feedback on expression. Hearsay. So I'm hearing what I'm hearing the reader and I'm giving them feedback. Repeating a series of words after the teacher says them. Hearsay. And this is a lot of times what we're targeting when we're targeting echoics for our young learners. Move blocks so they appear in ascending order. See do. So they're seeing the blocks and then they're doing the behavior, right? So I would have this one, see do places blocks. Sketches a picture of your mom from your memory. That's free draw or think draw. Good. So I want to contrast learning channels from learning styles because they're different. You hear learning styles a lot in education and in the disability research as well. But learning channels are very different than these learning styles. So learning styles are when individuals say, oh, they're a visual learner or they're an auditory learner. But there's decades of research to show that learning styles do not have evidence to support the claims. Now, a learner may have a preference for a specific channel, but that does not mean that they learn better in one channel than another. And we shouldn't tailor our instruction to only one channel. So students that we would tag as an auditory learner means they're fluent in the hear channel. So hear do, hear say, hear write, hear mark. But since they're already fluent in that channel, we shouldn't just practice in that channel. We should bring the other channels to fluency as well. So we need to build on other repertoires so that they're fluent across all channels. So we might do see say math facts or see write math facts. With a skill when we're doing teaching a concept, it may be see point, see match, see say. All of those we want to target so that we're not creating a preference for one channel versus the other, that we're wrapping the channels around. You can get really creative with this as well with your teaching strategies. So you can begin to yoke channels. So you can have the learner point and say. So see point say. So if I said, show me the cow, and they would point and say cow. So I'm getting receptive and tacting in the same target. So I'm hitting on multiple channels. So we've done the instructional design components. So we did our 4 steps. So we analyzed, did a component composite analysis. We then, from those components, we looked at what kind of learning we were hoping to achieve. We're either going to do a task analysis or a features analysis depending on the kind of learning, or sometimes we don't have to if it's simpler learning. And then we're going to prescribe our learning channels so we know exactly how the learner is going to contact the materials that we've created, as well as how they're going to respond. Then, once we have our instructional materials, we can begin to sequence that instruction, use different instructional strategies, and begin to evaluate with precision teaching. So we're going to talk now about how we can evaluate these things with precision teaching. And precision teaching is a measurement system. So precision teaching doesn't tell you how to teach, it just tells you how effective your teaching is. So at the root, it's about measurement and standard display on a standard acceleration chart to see how well the learner is doing and whether or not their frequencies of responding are increasing across time. Now, there are several steps to precision teaching in which we have to identify our pinpoints, which is what we just covered previously. We're then going to arrange the instructional episodes and materials. So we need to create materials to assess and practice. Now, we talked about that we need teaching stimuli from our concept analysis, right? Or from our features analysis. So we need a set of teaching stimuli. And we also need a set of testing stimuli. However, you should have 3 sets total. Your teaching, then your practice set, and then you want your testing set. So when you're arranging your instructional episodes, you're going to use 1 set of stimuli. And then when you're practicing, you're going to use a different set of stimuli. What you're then going to do after you arrange these instructional episodes and materials, you're going to record the learner's performance on the acceleration chart. You're going to review the acceleration and make a decision. So I want to focus more on the design. Since we talked about that pinpointing, I want to focus more on the design of the instructional materials here. Because we want to make sure that we're not putting any type of restriction on the learner's performance, that we can see what their natural rate of responding and natural frequencies are when we're designing our instructional materials. So we want to account for and recognize the different ceilings that are in place and how we can lift those ceilings to ensure that we're not stalling learner progress. The first type of ceiling we're going to talk about is measurement imposed ceilings. And with measurement imposed ceilings, we're lifting ceilings that are imposed by the measurement procedures that we employ when tracking the behavior. So, for example, when we look at time sampling, interval recording, and percentage-based measures, they have an inherent ceiling. You will never get higher than 100%, and you will never get lower than 0%. Now, percentages mask a lot of data. If I see that a learner performed 2 tasks in a minute, and they were both correct, that would be 100%. If I had a different learner who engaged in the same exact task, but they did it 100 times in a minute, they're also at 100%. So I'm not seeing that growth in performance. I'm not seeing changes of how quickly the learner is able to do something. I'm seeing that they're remaining at 100%. And I think we would all agree that those are 2 different performances. A behavior performed twice in a minute compared to the same behavior performed 100 times in a minute. And we start to see that behaviors look and feel different at different frequencies. So when we have the percentage-based measures, we're imposing percentage time sampling, interval recording, we're imposing a ceiling that we're not seeing where the learner's going anymore because they can't get above 100%. So what we want to do is actually measure the frequency of the behavior over a unit of time. So frequency, sometimes individuals refer to it as rate, is a count over unit of time. So how many times does the learner engage in the response over a period of time? Because if I see that the learner went from 10 in a minute on Monday to 20 in a minute on Monday, they've now doubled their repertoire. But if I look at percentage and they were at 100% both of those days, I wouldn't be able to see their growth. I wouldn't be able to see where they're at in their learning. This goes back to a natural science approach to behavior, y'all. How Skinner would measure behavior. Skinner found that frequency was the most sensitive unit of measurement, and all of behavior of organism focused on frequency of responding. So we're doing the same thing with our learners and looking at changes in frequency across time. The second ceiling we want to avoid with our learners are teacher-imposed ceilings, and sometimes you might hear this as procedure-imposed. And this is when we're giving learners too few opportunities to practice given a period of time. So for example, let's say that I give a learner a math sheet with 10 problems on it, and I do a minute timing. Their frequency is going to be 10 per minute at the maximum because I didn't provide them with more opportunities than they realistically could do. So I'm slowing down their frequency by not allowing them to get as many as they can. Another thing, like with imitation. So if I provide only 5 imitative models during a 1-minute period, that learner can't go above 5 per minute. So I'm stalling their frequencies. Instead, I want to give them more practice opportunities than they would ever realistically be able to do in a period of time. So if it's math problems, I'm doing 120 math problems on a sheet. They're not going to answer 120 in a minute, but I'm lifting that ceiling so I can see what their actual frequencies are. If it's imitation, I'm following the learner. So as soon as they do, let's say the model is do this, as soon as they do that, I'm moving on to the next model to then lift that ceiling so the learner's natural frequency of imitative responding can be seen. So I'm lifting that ceiling. The third ceiling that I want to ensure that I'm lifting is a learner-imposed ceiling. And learner-imposed ceiling means I'm targeting the wrong skill. There's prerequisite and component repertoires that are not established, which is hindering their performance. So think about this in terms of component composite analysis. Let's say that I have a learner who I want to get them at 60 tacts per minute. So I'm working, I'm seeing that performance isn't growing. So I say, I wonder if they can make 60 sounds per minute. So I do an assessment of echoic skills. And I'm looking at different phonemes and how quickly they can echo those phonemes. And I see that the learner is only able to echo 62 phonemes per minute. Well, I'm not going to get growth on my tacting program until I address the underlying skill of echoics. So once I start targeting echoics, I see that the learner-imposed ceiling is lifted and that performance on tacts begins to grow again. So I want to look at those prerequisite skills and say, am I targeting the wrong skill? What are those functional relationships between the component skills and that composite repertoire? I might look at things like distractibility. Do they have the prerequisite skills to be able to sit and attend? And if not, they're not going to grow in those other skills because I'm targeting the wrong thing. I selected the wrong target for that learner to practice. So I want to lift that ceiling as well. And the last ceiling I'm going to talk about is what Binder referred to as handicap imposed ceilings. And I like to think of it as biologically imposed ceilings. So that is when there's a biological reason as to why an individual is unable to engage in the skill. So for example, someone who had a traumatic brain injury, let's say that it affected, let's say it affected their gross motor performance. There might be biological reasons as to why then their frequencies are slower because biologically it's putting on a ceiling on that frequency. There's a cerebral palsy. When we can look at cerebral palsy and how the muscles are affected by that and how that might slow down things like pinching, grasping, turning, and releasing. Now, I'm going to tell you, though, that we don't want to default to biologically imposed ceilings. And I'm going to give you a story in a couple of slides about a precision teacher who failed to give up on her student that people were placing these biologically imposed ceilings on. But what we tend to see is when we lift the other ceilings and we continue practice with those individuals, the biologically imposed ceilings begin to lift too. We don't want to ever give up on our learners. So let's take a look then at the ceiling and what we can do to lift it and an example. So to lift and ensure that we don't have a measurement imposed ceiling, we're going to measure fundamental dimensions of behavior. So frequency, duration, latency. Most often we measure frequency. However, we can look at other aspects of that frequency, such as the duration of that frequency of behavior and the latency of that frequency of behavior in relation to some other stimulus event. So for example, what I do is I measure the number of correct responses emitted per minute rather than the percentage of trials. I can look at teacher-imposed ceilings. So I'm going to provide more opportunities than the learner could ever realistically complete during the timing period. So if I'm teaching someone how to catch a ball, I'm going to have a basket full of tennis balls and so they can practice catching. And I'm going to throw one tennis ball after another, after another, after another, and I'm going to count how many they caught during that 30-second timing period. For learner imposed ceilings, I'm going to lift that by doing a component composite analysis of the skills that I want to teach. I want to focus on those underlying component and tool skill repertoires that may not be developed as much as they should. And I'm going to focus on the fluency of those repertoire. And you see here I have MESA. In precision teaching and fluency-based research, we refer to fluent performance as meeting when the behavior meets criteria or the outcomes associated with fluency, which is maintenance, behavior maintains across time, endurance, it can be performed during real-life time expectations, stability, the behavior can be performed in the face of distractions, application, the behavior is applied in those real-life contexts, and adduction. Behaviors can be recruited to induce never-before-seen novel instances of that response, or of a response. So an example would be, I build frequency of math facts, and that's directly going to lift the ceiling of the frequency of higher order math skills such as computation. So I'm targeting the right skill to get growth for that learner. And biologically imposed ceilings. So if you address the other ceilings that we talked about, we can often address this ceiling. Learners can perform well above our previous expectations. There was a precision teacher, Elizabeth Houghton, and her husband Eric, and they worked with Terry Harris, who was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, and they said he would be in a residential facility, would never be able to go to school. And his teachers didn't give up on him. They started working at the most basic minimum responses. They did a component composite analysis. So they began to move his arms, gross motor movements, and count how many times he could move his arms. And they did it with arms and legs. And then as he was able to increase those frequencies, they worked on fine motor skills. As he was able to reach those frequencies, they worked on handwriting and other academic skills. Well, he was able to go to school, general education. He graduated high school, went to college. He found that his handwriting was slowing him down, and he wanted to be able to take his own notes. So he went back to his teacher, Elizabeth, and asked, "Can you help me with this?" And she worked with him on handwriting, copying marks, making letters, numerals. He was able to go to college, take notes independently in most of his classes. He's now an inspirational speaker on how his life is different because of his close friend and teacher, Elizabeth. He now likes to ski for fun, and his trajectory is different because his teacher didn't default to blaming biologically imposed ceilings. She worked with where he was at. She lifted the other ceilings, the learner imposed, the teacher imposed, the measurement imposed ceilings, and was able to really help this gentleman. And he still gives talks today. He was just recently at the conference for the Standard Acceleration Society about his journey with Elizabeth and what he's doing now with other precision teachers as he's getting older. So let's practice again. So as you can tell, it's an interactive virtual presentation where typically there's a lot more social aspect here. But I want you to tell me which ceiling is affect given the scenario. Tariq only answers 3 questions in a minute because his teacher only asked him 3 times. Yep, and that's a teacher-imposed ceiling. So the teacher only provided him with 3 opportunities to respond. Thus, he only responded 3 times in that period. Fatima cannot hold a pencil because her muscles are affected by cerebral palsy. What ceiling are we saying is in effect there? Good. It's a handicap-imposed ceiling or biologically imposed ceiling. Annie and Ron. So those are the names of my parents. Love you, Mom and Dad. Annie and Ron both scored 80% on the exam. However, it took Annie 5 minutes to finish it and Ron 50 minutes. What ceiling is in effect here? It's that measurement imposed ceiling. So the 80% doesn't show the differences with frequency. Jin is unable to answer math facts correctly at a high frequency because he is unable to write the number 0 through 9 quickly. What ceiling is in effect here? So learner imposed ceiling. Good. Yep, we're targeting the wrong skill. We need to target those component and tool skills. Jose is unable to hit tennis balls quickly because he cannot grip the tennis racket appropriately. That's lure imposed ceiling again. So we need to go back and do our component composite analysis. So notice when we do our component composite analysis early on, we can avoid some of these ceilings as part of our instructional design. And the way that we design our materials can lift the teacher imposed, and the way that we decide to measure and track. So we can do this as all part of our instructional design to ensure that these ceilings aren't in place for our learners. Marilyn is unable to respond at a higher frequency because she is only given 10 opportunities to respond on her test. What ceiling is in effect there? Good. Teacher imposed ceiling. Nice job with that one. All students are performing equally because they all scored 80%. What ceiling is in effect there? That's the measurement imposed ceiling too. Good. So 80% is not telling me how quickly they're doing it. I'm saying that everyone is equal. Andrew speaks slowly because of a TBI or traumatic brain injury. What ceiling is in effect there? The handicap imposed ceiling. Good. Sydney and Clark both receive A's in the class, even though Clark can answer 120 math facts in a minute, while Sydney can only answer 30. What ceiling's in effect there? That's the measurement imposed ceiling. Absolutely. All right. So we're trying to lift our ceiling. Let's go into then how we design and how we can further lift that teacher imposed ceiling. So when we're designing our materials within precision teaching, we're going to measure with frequency. So we're going to design our teaching stimuli to allow for high frequency performance and look at acceleration or growth across time of performance. So what that means is we're going to have more than enough exercises for the timing period, whether our timing period is 30 seconds, 1 minute, 20 seconds, 5 minutes, however long we decide to run that timing, we need to have more exercise than the learners are able to ever realistically complete. We need to ensure that they're able to perform the behavior continuously, so that they're able to engage in those responses back to back to back to back, and that they're not trying to flip a page or have to be restricted in some other fashion. And we're going to make adjustments based on increases in frequency and acceleration and not just accuracy. So accuracy is important, but highly accurate behavior is not going to do the trick if it's performed slowly. Think, if a learner is highly accurate at getting dressed in the morning, so they're 100% can complete the steps, but it takes them an hour to get dressed independently, that's not going to benefit the learner. So often do I see when a learner engages in those sorts of activities of daily living skills, slowly, they're at a higher risk of receiving punishment from caregivers and staff. Or they're at a higher risk for someone completing the skill for them rather than them learning how to do it fluently. So I told you to get dressed. It's now a half an hour and you have to go to school, right? So there might be some punishment-based procedures going on there. Or staff would say oh, we need to get you to breakfast really quick. All right, I'm just going to dress you today. Even though the participant or the individual is 30 years old and she is well equipped to dress herself, because those responses weren't taught to a high frequency, now other interventions are being used rather than addressing that high frequency or low frequency performance. Because it's accurate, it is accurate, but it's not at the frequency that's going to promote contact to the natural reinforcers. So we don't want to stop with highly accurate behavior. That's important to get there. And then we want to build it to high frequency so it maintains and the behavior is fluent. Now, not only do we want to design for high frequency and acceleration, but we also want to provide a variety of stimuli. This is going to, one, increase attention and focus, which may be an important component for fluent performance, but we also are getting away from teaching memorization. We don't want the learner to memorize the order in which the stimuli are presented, because that's not the type of stimulus control we want No, no, no. We want that really high quality stimulus control where the stimuli we selected from our careful analysis of instructional content is controlling the response that we want to see as the terminal response. So we're going to have multiple versions of practice materials. So let's take a look at some examples. Here's a sample of a curriculum from Morningside Academy. This is the Morningside Math Facts Fluency Program. And you'll see on the left-hand side, the missing number. They're teaching fact families. So with fact families, you can memorize 3 numbers in a family. And from those 3 numbers, you get 4 facts for free. So for example, with the fact family 2, 3, 5, we teach the learners to memorize that 2, 3, 5 go together and that the big number goes last. So 5 is always going to go last. So what that shows then is if I memorize 2, 3, 5, I can get 4 math facts for free. 2 plus 3 is 5, 3 plus 2 is 5, 5 minus 2 is 3, 5 minus 3 is 2. So I'm cutting down the amount of time that they need to study and memorize to a quarter of what they need to do. So the learners will go through and they'll either, if it's a C say, they're going to see that and say 2, 3, if you're following down the first column, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 2, 6, 5, 2, 4, 3, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 4, 6, 2. They can say it, or it may be a C write in which they're writing in the missing number. Right? And notice at the bottom here, it says version 1. So there's multiple versions of this. So they're not memorizing that column 1 is always going to be 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 2, 6, 5. The next sheet, they're going to be in different order. Then we have on the right-hand side, the same fact families, but now set up in traditional addition subtraction style. But notice all they're doing is filling in the missing number. So I see 2, 4, I know the missing number is 6. 2, 3, 5. I see that 5 minus 2, that's 3 because 2, 3, 5. 2, so I'm going to write 5 because 5 is missing. I'm going to write 2 because 2 is missing. I'm going to write 2 because 2 is missing. I'm going to write 4 because 2 is missing. And we get that for free because of the way that we designed our curriculum and our instruction. Here's an example for reading. So these are nonsense words and word parts as part of a basic elements. Notice there's 100 sounds on this sheet. So we've lifted that ceiling and we're trying to get learners to engage into 100 to 80 correct sounds per minute. So they're going to read phonetically. So fe, ba, le, ve, ni, g, je, m, pe, ha, ti, sa, bi, ka, wa, ya, cha. And then I'm timing them and seeing how many they can do. And you'll see at the bottom here too, versions 1 of 4. So there's multiple versions of this practice sheet. So learners, again, aren't memorizing the order. We can continue on with more advanced. So these are nonsense words to assess for reading phonetically. So the learner would see this and say spof, seed, thyme, sloob, steam, chooks, sky, bloob, clome, bleef. So this is teaching for the rule CCBCE, where E's at the end will make this vowel say its name. These aren't real words, so they can't memorize these. They can't memorize the words because they have to read phonetically. So it's a great way to practice phonics with high precision and practice. Let's say we're working on some tool skills with learners. So this might be a great program, or this is a great program. So this is Elizabeth Houghton's handwriting program, available at houghtonlearningcenter.com. And this is one that I've used a lot with young learners with autism when they're beginning to write. So rather than having learners just trace big letters, we can focus on a series of marks. So if we can get straight lines, diagonal lines, certain curves, all those marks are tools to then the component skills of numbers. So we can break down to all those specific components, marks, and then we're going to get easier letter formation, number formation, because we focused on the component repertoires of handwriting. So with C write marks, you'll see specific lines. And with this curriculum, what you do is you select which one you want the learner to do. So you can work with the learner and say, all right, which one do you want to work on today? And they circle the one they want to do. So let's say they circle the little line and big line. They're still going to be counted the same way because the same movements are involved in all of these, or the same response effort. So line, line, right? So they're going to be counted the same way. So the learner wants the little line, big line. Well, they can do that. And then we time it. Now in Elizabeth's program, based on the age of the learner, that's going to determine the frequency aim, or how many they should do per minute. But again, you'll see here that because there's 10 boxes, there's 2 marks each. That's 20 marks in each row. So you can count up how many marks the learner did in a minute without restricting their performance. Now for some learners, this box may add a ceiling. It may serve as a ceiling because they can go faster. So with that learner, I would just have a regular sheet of paper and let them write the marks to further lift that ceiling. So there are so many different variations of this sheet in our program. So you begin to lift that ceiling as the learners get more comfortable and fluent. Here's one for listener responding. So if I'm teaching a learner with autism how to point to the animal, I can still throw that in a less restrictive way by following the learner. So let's say that my mouse is the learner's finger. I might start a timing, say, please begin, and say cat, and they point. Dog, cat, dog, bear, rabbit, dog, rabbit, cat, bear, rabbit, dog, cat. And they're able to freely go through and touch the item, the corresponding animal, as I'm following their instructions. So it's still a little bit restricted, but it's way more free, and I've lifted the ceiling way more with something like this, right? And notice at the bottom, it says version 1, slice 1. So I would have 4 different versions of this practice material so that the learner doesn't learn that just in the top left corner, that's a dog, in the top right corner, that's a cat, the bottom left is a bear, and the bottom right is a rabbit. I'm going to want to vary their location, and then I'm going to think about my concept analysis and vary all the different features. So I want to have the whole variety of dogs and cats and bears and rabbits. So I don't want them to think that bears are always brown, right? That a grizzly bear is the only bear. I'm going to show a polar bear. I'm going to show a black bear, grizzly bear, a baby bear, right? All of them. Same with dogs and cats and rabbits. But I can still have that in a with that ceiling lifted by doing something like that. With tacts, I can do the same thing. If the learner can move through the cards themselves, I'm going to build that into my programming so they can go through as many as they want. I've worked with a company they had an iPad, and the learner would swipe every time they got the tact right. So they would see the dog, they would say, dog, good job. And they would move through and they would tact as many items as they could in a minute, but they were in control of the response. So they could freely move through as quickly as they were able to. And that's a really cool high-tech way of doing this, but still lifting that teacher-imposed ceiling and measuring the frequency of response. This can be for any skill. Any skill that you're measuring on the DB map, you can lift those teacher-imposed ceilings and follow all these different rules on instructional design. So notice here, with version 2, now the cat's in the top left-hand corner, dog's in the bottom right-hand corner. This bear is on a full body, it's waving. This rabbit has an open mouth. That's my version 2, so I'm practicing with that. Version 3, I change it up again. So every new timing, I'm working on a different sheet and a different version of the slice, so the learner's not memorizing the order of the animal, or that one specific animal is there. And then remember what I said, we're gonna have our teaching, so we've taught this. This is our practice materials to assess it. And then I'm gonna test with a completely new set to see that the learner is able then to further prove their conceptual understanding of the tasks. So let's see this in real time. So how I can evaluate things with precision teaching. So this video comes from Agile Instruction and Management Solutions, or AIMS, and it shows you the steps of precision teaching where they'll run a timing. They've lifted the measurement imposed ceilings. They've lifted the teacher imposed ceilings. I don't know where the learner's at in the repertoire, so I don't know if there is a learner imposed ceiling or a biological imposed ceiling, but you'll see that they pinpoint the behavior, and this is a see-do sorts money. So they're seeing the money. They're doing, and they're by sorting the money, and the teacher is collecting frequency of responses, and then she's not interrupting the learner, she's not hindering the learner's performance, and at the end she's going to count up and she's going to chart the data on the standard acceleration chart to make a decision. So let's see what that looks like.
All right, Buster, we're going to sort your money now. There's 5, 10, and 1. We're going to go for 20 seconds. Let's see how many you can do. Ready, set, sort. Nice work, kiddo. Keep it up. Nice, buddy. Keep it up, buddy. Good for you. Sorting, good for you. Thank you, give me 5. Yeah.
So notice that this teacher used the 20-second timing period. Now, she then had the learner have way more money in that stack when he was sorting than he would ever realistically be able to do. She's using a permanent product recording system, so she doesn't have to count the frequency in the moment. She can count up how many dollars that he sorted correctly. And then what I like about this video is that it shows you that she went in and then she dropped the data on the standard acceleration chart. So notice that that frequency shows, so there's the record floor saying it was 20-second timing. The question mark below it says that there were 0 errors, so he's highly accurate. His frequency was around 50 responses per minute. And then this open circle here, down here, that represents how many timings were done. So I can see that 1 per day, 2 per day, he worked on that for 2 timings on a day. I can then analyze and see whether or not his frequencies increase over time to the specified aim. And if they're not, I'm going to make instructional decisions to figure out why the learner isn't progressing and whether it's I'm targeting the wrong skill or my analysis of instructional content is incorrect, but I'm going to make decisions and make changes. And this is the recursive process. So then if the learner is not progressing, I'm going to go back to my instructional design in any part that it is, and I'm going to tweak it because I want to make sure that all learners are learning. So I'm going to figure out why. And using precision teaching, I'm better able to make decisions when I have this sensitive of a measurement system and data display. Okay, so we analyzed our instructional content. We created teaching and practice materials. We lifted the ceilings. We're going to evaluate our program with precision teaching. Now, the last part, how are we going to teach the skill? Now, that is an entirely different presentation, but I want to kind of help you conceptualize where each of these components fall into place and our ultimate goal with teaching. So do we do things like discrete trial? Are we going to use errorless learning? Are we going to do natural environment training? Those are all instructional strategies that have been empirically validated for learners with autism, and there are some benefits and drawbacks to each of those. Now I'm going to add to that list this concept and instructional strategy called methetics. Not mathematics, methetics. It was conceptualized by Tom Gilbert and was used extensively within the creation of direct instruction materials and programs. So methetics you can think of as demonstrate, guide, test, delayed test. You might have heard of it as model, lead, test. Those of you familiar with Anita Archer, I do it, we do it, you do it. But it's this gradual release of responsibility from the teacher to the learner where you systematically fade back the amounts of prompts that you need. Now, there's formalized published curricula, so I like to refer to them as big D, big I. So those are the published curricula through SRA. that already have the design in it. So Language for Learning is a great program for individuals with autism as they've kind of aged out of the VB-MAP, or they tested out of the VB-MAP skill sets. And this is a great program for expanding their verbal repertoires even more. And the design is all done. However, you can still take components of mathematics and make instruction very explicit. And this is what's referred to sometimes as little d, little I, because it's not the published curricula, but those methods still underlie. Now, I want to cover these two concepts of free operant and discrete trial or restricted operant and show you where they fall within the learning, the course of learning with your learner. So with free operant responding, I want you to, I want to kind of get a little historical and nerdy here, but Skinner really considered all behavior and all operants to be free. It was Charlie Foerster who's credited with being the first person to use the term free operant. But really, when we're talking about free operant, we're talking about when the organism or learner is free to respond at any time, to make a response at any time, and is free to make more than one response at a time. So therefore, they're free to repeat. Now, this might look like a rat. For the clearest example, a rat in the operant chamber, they can press the lever without as many times as they want without any restrictions. Okay? A non-example is if I put a rat in a T maze, it can only go up, make a choice, and then it's removed. So they're not free to respond at any time. They're not free to repeat responses either. Now, what we're striving to when we were talking about lifting the ceilings, we're trying to get as free operant as possible with our learners responding. And here's a quote from Sidman. The experimental organism is free to respond at any time. There are no harnesses to restrain the animal forcibly. The lever is never withdrawn from the experimental space to prevent the subject from responding at times that would be inconvenient for the investigator's theory. The only restrictions placed upon the subject's recorded behavior are those inherent with the laws of behavior. This is called free respondent situation. And that's where we want to get our learners. We want to get our learners to the point where they're able to freely respond and we're not holding them back. So I see that quote as a parallel to education, when we don't want to hold our learners back, when they're able to do more than what we're requiring them to do. And a lot of times the learners that we're helping are already behind and we don't want to hold them back. We want to lift all of that so they're able to continue to go on and catch up as quickly as they can. Now, when we compare that to discrete trial is really restricted. So I'm not saying that it's restricted in terms of what we can do with it, but a discrete trial is a restricted operant. The learner can only respond to each SD once or the instructional material once. It's restricted in the sense that the number of responses emitted by the learner is controlled by another person. So typically the teacher. So think that's getting with the teacher imposed restriction, right? I'm controlling the number of responses that you're able to emit. And with discrete trial, we focus typically on accuracy or percentage as the basic datum. And we see that with that, there's a measurement imposed ceiling going on there. And when we have percentage, we're not going to see the sensitivity we get with frequency to environmental changes. However, with free operant, the learner can respond as many times as they can, and there's no ceiling on how many responses are produced by the individual. The only ceiling is their natural ceilings as a learner that begin to get lifted as they progress through our instructional sequence. We use frequency as the basic datum to measure the behavior, and this is because it's sensitive to environmental changes. So let's look at then the difference between restricted operant and discrete trial when we're looking at the same behavior. So this is a see-say word, so the learner's seeing the word and they're saying it. On the left, we have a restricted operant paradigm for looking at this skill.
What does this one say?
I don't know.
You don't know? It says when.
When?
Yeah. Say when.
When?
Good job. All right. What about this one? What does this say? It does say but. Good job. Give me 5.
Okay, so in that opportunity, there was 20-second video. The learner was only able to engage in 2 responses. The instructor was controlling the pace there. and he was restricting how many opportunities were imposed given the paradigm in which that behavior was being assessed. Let's take the same behavior and we can see it in a free operant paradigm where the learner is able to progress through as many responses as they can in a period of time.
Oh, just from any cow, put take every old bite. No, him could after find
Good.
him again. Think
Keep
only
going.
once they let every cat stop and take open. Then ask, put, give.
Good job.
So notice there, the learner was able to get through a lot more responses. Now they were able to get through a lot more because they were under their own natural frequency, or they were engaging in their own natural frequency. So that learner did as many as they could. Doesn't mean they can't go faster or slower, right? But they were free to respond given the contingencies in effect there. Now, why I talk about this is that one is not superior than the other. We don't want to say one is bad. However, we want to see where these types of teaching interactions come. So we talked about precision teaching, and we're not just going to start there. We're not going to start with go fast, right? We're going to follow the instructional sequence. So here's a model that we use at Morningside, the 3 phases of teaching and learning, with the first phase being instruction, the second phase being practice, and the third phase being application. And notice we go from heavily high frequency of teacher prompts, and then we slow down the number of teacher prompts, and we begin to increase the frequency of that response. So we're using a very restricted operant paradigm. So we might use things like discrete trial and slow down restricted direct instruction to get the behavior to occur as we systematically fade back our prompts. But as you see, as we begin to fade back our prompts, we're getting more and more into that free operant paradigm. Once we hit accuracy, remember what we said, that accuracy building is not enough. So we then increase the frequencies, and as we go and increase our frequencies, we're getting freer and freer within our paradigms of teaching, and we're able to lift those ceilings to when the learner gets to fluency. So we're going to have to start on the restricted end and free it up as we go. And the instructional materials or technologies that we use, it's gonna vary, and that's gonna be based on your understanding of your learner and what types of teaching strategies they're gonna need. I highly recommend you all to really look into the concept of Methetics as a technology if you aren't familiar, because it's just such a fantastic way of looking at teaching, and that's the whole demonstrate, guide, test phase here that we're looking at. The last thing I want to talk about is the benefits of free operant responding. And Og Lindsley, the founder of Precision Teaching, demonstrated that when behavior results in, or when we're behaving in a free operant paradigm, there are some benefits that come with it. And the first benefit is that we're free to present stimuli. So free operant responding is self-paced or self-presented. So eventually we want our learners to be able to stop and start over. We want them to skip their unknowns, right? We want them in charge of their learning. So once we're in a free operant paradigm, the learner is free to present. So as I was saying with the one learner, they can go through cards. You may have heard of SAFMEDS is free to present stimuli, or even the iPad. When I said the one learner we had scrolling through the iPad, they were presenting their own stimuli and they were in charge of their learning, which is the goal of education. The learner is also free to form responses. So the learner selects the most comfortable form of responding, right? And that's going to build on unique responding. So think in the Skinner box, a rat can press the lever with one paw, two paws, teeth, their butt, all counts. Our learners, once they're in a free operant paradigm, you'll see that they shift the forms of responses to allow them to most comfortably engage in the behavior and get through as many as possible. So sometimes you'll see learners are standing up and writing, or they're sitting crisscross applesauce while they're scrolling through, and that's fine if it's comfortable for them. As long as the response is correct, they can form the response that's most comfortable for them. The learner is further able to repeat responses. So the learner can repeat responses multiple times to get multiple practice. So they're not just hitting on everything once, right? They can hit on multiple targets again and again and go back to ones that they struggled with and hit those even more. And lastly, Fast and the Furious. So the learner's free to speed. So we want to design our operandum, we want to design our instructional materials so that they operate faster than the organism can realistically do. So free to speed was predominant in early behavior analysis. In fact, fun fact with behavior of organisms, in that book, there was a restriction on how many times the rat could press the lever because it was only counting one per second. So they can only max out at 60 per minute. So there was a little bit of restriction there. But we never want to put a ceiling on the learner's rate. We want them to go, go, go. And in a free operant paradigm, they're able to respond at their natural frequencies. So I'm going to skip this practice because we're running out of time. Whoops. But I wanted to leave you all with this slide in case you have any questions or concerns about anything. This is really, really difficult material to grasp, and it really is like a doctoral program or an advanced graduate degree to really do instructional design well. But I'm going to leave you with care enough to chart, follow your chart, and always use your heart when you chart. Put the heart back in science and make sure that we're doing this to benefit our learners. Like I said, we can always lift those ceilings and make sure to ensure that the learner is growing. We're never going to give up on them. By having this instructional design background, we're better able to do that. So my email is listed below. Please reach out to me. I'll be happy to share any resources with you that I have. And with that, I hope you all enjoy the rest of your conference. Take care.